What happens when an ordinary woman, armed with nothing but her principles, tells one of the richest men in the world, no, she's a waitress working double shifts to save her brother's life. He's Julian Croft, a billionaire who has never waited a day for anything. In the neon glow of a humble 24-hour diner, their worlds collide over a simple breakfast queue. She thought she was just doing her job. She had no idea that by enforcing one simple rule, she would ignite a war. By the next morning, her world would be turned upside down, because that billionaire didn't just get angry. He got even. This is the story of how a single act of defiance cost one woman her job, only to show her what she was truly worth. The rain fell on the streets of downtown Austin with a relentless, percussive rhythm, each drop a tiny hammer against the pavement and the wide glass windows of the Bluebird Diner. Inside it was a sanctuary of warmth and light, an island in the grey, slick misery of a Tuesday morning. The air was thick with the holy trinity of diner smells, sizzling bacon, brewing coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of pancake batter. For Clara Hayes, this was the smell of survival. At 26, Clara moved with an economy of motion that only came from years of balancing plates to filling coffees and placating hungry customers. Her dark ponytail was secured so tightly it pulled at the corners of her eyes, which were framed by the faint purplish smudges of chronic exhaustion. Every dollar she earned, every tip she pocketed, went into a fiercely guarded fund. A fund for Leo. Her brother, 16 and brilliant, was tethered to a life of quiet rooms and oxygen tanks, his lungs a battleground for a disease so rare the doctors spoke in hushed, uncertain tones. The experimental treatment he needed was a mountain of cash she was determined to climb one cup of coffee at a time. The morning rush was a controlled storm. Clara was the conductor. She knew Mrs. Gable, a widow with kind eyes and a cloud of white hair, needed her decaf with one splendor, the moment she sat down in her usual booth. She knew the two construction workers, Manny and Dave, would split the lumberjack's feast and argue about football. She knew the line, the sacred unspoken rule of the Bluebird. You wait your turn. Everyone did. Doctors, lawyers, students, tourists. The linoleum floor of the diner was a great equalizer. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival with a gust of cold, damp air. Clara, her back to the door, as she set down a plate of eggs, didn't need to look. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The low hum of conversation faltered for a half-second. It was the kind of silence that follows the entrance of a predator into a peaceful glade. She turned a fresh pot of coffee in hand and saw him. He wasn't just well-dressed. He was sculpted by his suit, a charcoal grey creation that probably cost more than her car. It fit him like a second skin, accentuating a lean, powerful frame. His hair was dark and impeccably styled, though a few stray strands were damp from the rain. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving lines with a jaw that looked like it could cut glass. But it was his eyes, a startling glacial blue, that held the room captive. They were eyes that didn't just see. They assessed, they valued, they owned. He strode past the small, shuffling line of 4 people waiting patiently by the "Please wait to be seated" sign, as if they were invisible, as if the sign itself was a quaint suggestion he had no time for. He stopped directly in front of Clara's station, his gaze sweeping over the bustling diner with an air of dismissive appraisal. "A table. For one," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. His voice was a low, smooth baritone, accustomed to instant obedience. Clara placed the coffee pot back on its warmer, the glass clinking softly. She took a deliberate breath, her spine straightening. She'd dealt with entitled customers before, but this was a different species. This was entitlement as a fundamental law of physics. "Good morning," she began, her voice even and calm, the one she used for crying babies and angry drunks. "There's a short wait this morning. If you'll just stand behind the gentleman in the green jacket, I'll get you a table as soon as one opens up." She gestured with her pen towards the back of the line. The man's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He looked from her to the line and back again, a flicker of genuine confusion on his face as if she'd just started speaking in a foreign language. "I don't wait," he said, the words clipped and final. A nervous cough came from the man in the green jacket. Mrs. Gable watched from her booth, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Clara could feel the weight of their collective attention. This was more than a simple dispute. It was a test of the diner's unwritten constitution. "I understand you're in a hurry, sir," Clara said, her voice a little firmer now. "But everyone here is waiting. That's how it works." A ghost of a smile, cold and humorless, touched his lips. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a wallet made of dark, supple leather. He extracted 2 crisp $100 bills and placed them on the counter beside her order pad. "Perhaps this will make it work a little faster," he said, the blue eyes challenging her. Clara stared at the money. $200. That was a full day's tips on a good day. It was another brick in the wall of Leo's medical fund. The temptation was a physical thing, a hot, sharp pang in her chest. She could feel her resolve waver for a split second. She thought of Leo's wheezing breaths in the middle of the night. Then she looked at Mrs. Gable, who had been coming to this diner every day since her husband died, finding solace in the routine and the community. She looked at the tired student at the front of the line, clutching a textbook, probably needing a cheap meal before a big exam. And her resolve hardened into steel. This wasn't just a diner. It was her diner. These weren't just customers. They were her people. She gently pushed the bills back across the counter towards him with the end of her pen. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "But our tables aren't for sale. You can either wait in line or you can find somewhere else to eat." The silence in the diner was now absolute. Even the sizzle from the grill seemed to have quieted. The man stared at her, the mask of cool indifference finally cracking. For the first time, she saw a raw, unfiltered emotion in his eyes, pure, undiluted shock. It was the face of a king who had just been told no by a commoner, and he simply could not compute it. He slowly retracted the money, his movements stiff with controlled fury. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper that was for her alone. "You have no idea who I am. Do you? I know you're the man who thinks he's more important than a widow who wants her breakfast and a student who needs to study." Clara whispered back, her own voice trembling slightly with a surge of adrenaline. "Here, that's the only identity that matters." His jaw clenched. For a long moment she thought he might explode, that the carefully constructed facade would shatter into a million pieces of rage. Instead, he straightened up, a chillingly calm expression settling back over his features. "Enjoy your little kingdom while it lasts," he said softly. He gave the diner one last sweeping look, but it was different this time. It wasn't dismissive. It was proprietary. It was the look of a wolf eyeing a sheepfold. He turned and walked out the bell, chiming his departure. The diner exhaled as one. Dave, the construction worker, let out a low whistle. "Clara, you've got guts of steel, girl." Mrs. Gable smiled at her, a real warm smile of approval. "You did the right thing, dear." Clara managed a weak smile back, her heart still hammering against her ribs. She felt a surge of pride, of righteous satisfaction. But underneath it, a cold tendril of fear began to uncurl in the pit of her stomach. His final words echoed in her mind. "Enjoy your little kingdom while it lasts." It sounded like a promise, or a death sentence. She spent the rest of her shift trying to shake the feeling that she hadn't just stood up to a customer. She had poked a dragon, and she had a terrible sinking feeling that she was about to get burned. The next morning the rain had stopped, but a heavy, oppressive humidity clung to the city, making the air feel thick and sticky. Clara arrived for her shift feeling as though she hadn't slept at all. The encounter with the man in the suit had replayed in her mind on a loop, his cold eyes and colder threat chasing away any chance of rest. She told herself she was being paranoid. He was just a rich jerk with a bruised ego. What could he possibly do? The moment she pushed open the door to the Bluebird, she knew something was wrong. The usual morning chaos was absent. In its place was a tense, funereal silence. Sal, the diner's owner, was standing behind the counter, his face the color of old parchment. Sal was a stout, balding man in his late 50s, whose default expression was a grumpy scowl, but whose heart was as soft as the buttermilk biscuits he baked every morning. Today his scowl was gone, replaced by a look of hollowed-out despair. The other morning waitress, Maria, was wiping down an already spotless counter, her movements jerky and anxious. Even the cook, a mountain of a man named Gus, who communicated mostly in grunts, was leaning against the stainless steel pass-through, his arms crossed, a worried frown on his face. "What's going on?" Clara asked, her voice hushed. "Did something happen?" Sal looked up at her, and the defeat in his eyes hit her like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just shook his head and slid a stack of neatly printed papers across the counter. Clara picked up the top sheet. It was a legal document filled with dense, impenetrable jargon. But she didn't need to read the fine print. The names at the top were enough. The seller, Salvatore Esposito. The purchasing entity, Croft Holdings, LLC. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Croft. "No," she whispered, her blood turning to ice. "Sal, no." "You didn't." "I didn't have a choice, Clara," Sal said, his voice raspy. "He made me an offer. It was 5 times what this place is worth. 5 times. My wife's medical bills, the kids' college. I couldn't say no. The lawyers were here first thing this morning. It's done." "The man from yesterday." Clara breathed, feeling the floor tilt beneath her feet. It was him. Julian Croft. Sal confirmed the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. Apparently he's some kind of real estate titan. Buys and sells half of downtown before breakfast. I didn't know who he was until it was too late. The bell above the door chimed. It was him. Julian Croft. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was dressed in dark, expensive jeans, a simple black cashmere sweater, and leather shoes that were probably Italian. The casual attire somehow made him look even more powerful, more imposing. He wasn't playing a role anymore. He was simply himself. And he was the man who owned them all now. He didn't acknowledge Sal or Maria. His glacial blue eyes found Clara and held her fast. There was no anger in them now. No shock. There was something far worse, a cool, triumphant satisfaction. He had promised her he'd destroy her kingdom, and now he stood before her, the new king. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth as silk. I trust you've all been brought up to speed on the new ownership. Clara felt a surge of defiant rage. You did this just to spite me. You bought a whole restaurant because you had to wait in line for 5 minutes. He cocked his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Let's call it a lesson in market dynamics. You have a product, a table. I wanted to purchase it. You refused my initial offer. So I adjusted my strategy and acquired the entire company. He gestured around the diner. All of this, just to get a cup of coffee without a lecture. He walked behind the counter, invading their space, his presence sucking the very air out of the room. He ran a hand along the worn formica, a look of faint disgust on his face. There will be some changes, he announced, his voice ringing with an authority that made Sal flinch. Starting tomorrow, we're closing for 48 hours for a refresh. New point-of-sale systems, new suppliers, only the best. And new uniforms. He looked directly at Clara's slightly faded apron-stained uniform. Something a little more professional. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Clara's mind was racing. This was it. He was going to fire her. He'd bought the whole place just to have the satisfaction of telling her to get out. She braced herself, lifting her chin. If she was going down, she'd go down fighting. As for staffing, Croft continued, his gaze still locked on her. For now, everyone's position is secure, on a probationary basis. Clara blinked. Not fired, why? You're not firing me, she asked, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Fire you? Oh no. That would be far too easy. That would be letting you go. I just bought your favorite place in the world, Ms. Hayes. I want you to have a front row seat for everything I'm going to do to it. He wanted her to watch. He wanted her to stay and suffer as he dismantled everything she loved piece by piece. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a soon not a termination. He was putting her in a cage and daring her to leave, knowing she couldn't, knowing she needed the job, the money for Leo. The next 2 days were a blur of chaotic activity. A team of sleek, efficient workers descended on the Bluebird, stripping it down with cold precision. The comfortable, worn-out booths were reupholstered in a sterile, dark grey leather. The quirky, mismatched salt and pepper shakers were replaced with identical minimalist steel cylinders. A new complex touchscreen POS system was installed, a glowing monument to everything the Bluebird wasn't. The new uniforms arrived in glossy boxes. They were black, severely tailored, and made of a stiff, unforgiving fabric. Clara put it on and felt like a stranger in her own skin. When they reopened, the soul of the diner was gone. The warm, welcoming atmosphere had been replaced by the cold, impersonal ambiance of a high-end airport lounge. The regulars felt it immediately. "What's all this, then?" Mrs. Gable asked, running a hand over the cold new upholstery of her booth. "It feels chilly in here." Clara tried to smile. "Just a few upgrades, Mrs. G." The new menu was another shock. It was laminated and minimalist. Many of the old comforting dishes were gone, replaced by things like avocado toast with microgreens and deconstructed huevos rancheros. But Clara noticed one strange thing. Tucked away at the bottom of the breakfast menu, one item remained untouched. Eleanor's special, a simple stack of 3 buttermilk pancakes with a side of fresh berries. It had been Sal's tribute to his own late wife. It was the least profitable item on the old menu, the kind of thing a ruthless businessman like Croft would have eliminated without a second thought. Why was it still there? Julian Croft was a constant, unnerving presence. He didn't sit in an office. He took the corner booth, Mrs. Gable's old booth, and sat there for hours working on a sleek laptop, his blue eyes missing nothing. He watched Clara as she struggled with the new POS system, her fingers fumbling on the touchscreen. He watched as she tried to explain to Manny and Dave that the lumberjack's feast was no longer available. He watched her every moment of frustration and discomfort, and she could feel his smug satisfaction from across the room. One afternoon, during a lull, he called her over. "Ms. Hayes." She walked to his table, her back ramrod straight. "Yes, Mr. Croft." He gestured to the empty cup in front of him. "Coffee." She retrieved the new ridiculously heavy thermal carafe and poured him a cup. As she did, her eyes fell on the screen of his laptop. It was open to a complex financial spreadsheet. But peeking out from behind the window was his desktop background. It was a photo of a woman, a beautiful woman with warm, laughing eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the world. She was standing in front of a familiar place. It was the Bluebird Diner, the old Bluebird, with its faded sign and welcoming glow. The woman in the photo was holding a half-eaten pancake on a fork. Julian Croft followed her gaze. In a flash, he minimized the spreadsheet, but it was too late. He saw that she had seen it. His face, for a fleeting moment, was not the face of a ruthless billionaire. It was the face of a man caught with a raw, gaping wound, exposed to the world. A profound, aching sadness flickered in his eyes before the mask of cold indifference slammed back into place. "Is there something you need, Ms. Hayes?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Clara just stared at him, her mind reeling. The woman, the diner, the pancakes, Eleanor's special. It all clicked into place with a sickening lurch. This wasn't just about spite. This wasn't just about a bruised ego. This was about something else entirely. Something deeper. Something broken. She had assumed Julian Croft had no heart. She was beginning to suspect the terrifying truth was that he did have one, and she had just stumbled right into the very center of where it had been shattered, and that she realized was a far more dangerous place than she had ever imagined. The discovery of the photograph shifted the ground beneath Clara's feet. Her anger, once a clean, righteous fire, was now muddied with confusion and an unwelcome flicker of empathy. A simple vindictive monster was easy to hate. A grieving man acting out of some deep, unspoken pain was a far more complicated problem. Julian Croft's behavior grew more erratic. He was no longer content to simply observe from his corner booth. He began to interfere, micromanaging every aspect of the diner with a maddening obsession. He'd stand behind the counter and critique the way Clara stacked plates. He'd taste the coffee and send it back, claiming the beans were ground too coarsely. He insisted the bacon be cooked to a specific, almost scientifically precise level of crispness. The diner staff, once a tight-knit family, became a tense, anxious crew walking on eggshells. The regulars, one by one, started to drift away. The new sterile Bluebird wasn't their home anymore. Mrs. Gable stopped coming in for her daily decaf. Manny and Dave found a new greasy spoon down the street that still served the kind of breakfast that could fuel a day of hard labor. Each absence was a fresh wound for Clara. One quiet afternoon, only a handful of tables were occupied by tourists who didn't know any better. Julian was at the counter, a rare occurrence, staring blankly at the menu. Clara, wiping down the espresso machine, finally broke the silence that had stretched between them for days. "It was her name, wasn't it?" she asked softly. Eleanor. Julian flinched, his head snapping up. His blue eyes were flinty. I don't know what you're talking about. The woman in the photograph on your computer. Clara pressed her heart, starting to beat a little faster. And Eleanor's special. That was your wife, wasn't it? He stared at her, his jaw working silently. The armor was back in place, but she could see the cracks. My personal life is none of your concern, Ms. Hayes. Just do your job. This is my job, she shot back, her frustration boiling over. My job is to serve customers in a place that feels welcoming. But you've turned it into a mausoleum. Our regulars are gone. The heart of this place is gone. If this is all about her, if this place meant something to you both, then why are you systematically destroying it? His control finally snapped. He slammed his hand down on the counter, the sharp crack echoing through the silent diner. Destroying it. I'm improving it. I'm making it efficient, profitable. This place was a relic, a failing business propped up by cheap coffee and nostalgia. I am saving it. You're embalming it, Clara retorted, her voice rising. This isn't a business to these people. It's a community. And it was a community you and she were once a part of, wasn't it? You came here. The fight went out of him as quickly as it had appeared. He slumped slightly, the anger draining away to reveal the raw grief beneath. He looked around the cold, empty room, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see what he had done. It was our place, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We met in college here in Austin. I was a scholarship kid with one decent suit and an oversized ambition. She was everything. She saw something in me no one else did. We were broke. We'd come here on Sunday mornings. She always ordered the pancakes. She called them her one affordable luxury. He stared at the spot where Mrs. Gable's booth used to be, now just a sterile grey box. This was the last place we ate together before we moved to New York. The last normal day we ever had. A few years later, I had all the money in the world. And a year after that, a drunk driver ran a red light. And she was gone. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Clara felt all the fight drain out of her, replaced by a profound, aching sorrow for this man she had wanted so desperately to hate. I came back to Austin for a deal, he continued, his eyes vacant. I wanted to see it again, to feel something. And when I walked in, and you... He trailed off. You and your stupid rules. It was all so different, so mundane. It made me angry. I wanted to control it, to make it perfect, to freeze it in time the way I remembered it. But I just broke it instead. He looked at her, then his eyes stripped of all their power and arrogance. He just looked lost. I don't know how to fix it. Before Clara could respond, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A frantic text from her mother. Leo, hospital, breathing trouble. Come now. The world narrowed to a single point of terror. I have to go, she said, her voice shaking as she ripped off her apron. It's my brother. She didn't wait for permission. She ran out of the diner, leaving Julian Croft standing alone in the ruins of his own creation, a ghost in a restaurant full of them. At the hospital, the news was bad. Leo's condition had taken a sharp downturn. The doctor, a kind but weary woman named Dr. Aris, explained that his lung function was deteriorating faster than expected. The experimental treatment was no longer a far-off hope. It was an immediate, desperate necessity. And the first round of payments, A staggering $25,000 was due within the week if they wanted to secure his spot in the program. Clara felt the world crumble. The money she had saved so meticulously was a pittance compared to that. The idea of raising that much in a week was impossible. The weight of it was crushing a physical pressure on her chest that made it hard to breathe. She spent the night in a hard plastic chair by Leo's bed, listening to the rhythmic hiss and click of the machines that were keeping him alive. In the sterile quiet of the hospital, the problems of the diner seemed trivial a lifetime away. The next afternoon, when she returned to the Bluebird to pick up her paycheck, she found the diner in an uproar. A man in a sharp suit, flanked by two equally imposing associates, was in a heated argument with Julian. The man was Marcus Thorne, a notoriously predatory developer known for buying up entire city blocks and replacing them with soulless glass and steel high-rises. "The offer is final, Croft," Thorne was saying, his voice dripping with condescension. "I have every other business on this block ready to sign. Esposito was the last holdout. Since you so conveniently took his property off his hands, you're the final piece of the puzzle. Sell to me, or I will make your life a living hell." "The diner is not for sale, Thorne," Julian said, his voice a low growl. Thorne laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Don't be sentimental. It's a failing business you overpaid for out of spite. I'm offering you a clean, profitable exit. I know you've been bleeding cash on this vanity project. Take the win and walk away." It was then that Clara understood the pressure Sal had been under, the reason he had sold so quickly. It hadn't just been Julian's exorbitant offer. Thorne's company had been circling for months trying to force him out. Julian hadn't just bought the diner to punish her. He had perhaps, without even realizing it himself, saved it from being bulldozed. "Get out of my restaurant," Julian said, taking a step forward. Thorne smirked. "This isn't over." He and his men turned and left, casting a shadow that lingered long after they were gone. Julian turned and saw Clara standing by the door. His face was pale, his jaw tight with fury. All the grief and confusion of the day before had been burned away, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. "I won't let him have it," he said, more to himself than to her. "I won't let him tear this place down." He looked at her, and a silent understanding passed between them. They were no longer just a boss and an employee, an antagonist and a victim. They were two people bound to the same small patch of land for entirely different reasons against a common enemy. "He called it a vanity project," Clara said quietly. "Said you were bleeding cash on it." Julian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure exhaustion. "I am. The upgrade's the suppliers. I've lost more money in the last week than this place used to make in a year." He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Funny. I have enough money to buy the world, but I'm about to be run out of a tiny diner by a shark like Thorne, because I don't know the first thing about running a place like this." An idea, wild and audacious, began to form in Clara's mind. It was born of desperation and a sudden, bizarre sense of shared purpose. "Maybe you don't," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But I do." He stared at her, confused. "You have the money and the power to fight a man like Thorne," she explained, her words coming faster now. "But I have the knowledge to make this place work. I know the customers. I know the community. I know how to bring the soul back to this diner. You want to save the Bluebird. You can't do it alone." She took a deep breath. "You need a partner." Julian Croft stared at Clara, his expression a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. The idea was absurd. A partnership with his waitress, the same woman he had set out to humiliate. And yet, as he looked at her, he didn't see a mere employee. He saw the same fierce, unyielding spirit that had refused his bribe, the same fire that had challenged him when no one else dared. He saw the one person who cared about this place as much as he did, albeit for different reasons. A partner. He repeated the words, feeling foreign on his tongue. "You handle the wolf at the door," Clara said, nodding towards the entrance where Marcus Thorne had just stood. "You fight him in the boardrooms and the zoning meetings where you live. I'll fight him here on the ground. I'll bring back the regulars. I'll make this diner the heart of the neighborhood again, a place the community will fight for. Thorne can't tear down a building. He has to tear down a home. We'll make that impossible for him." It was a gamble, a long shot, but as Julian looked at the cold, empty diner he had created and thought of Thorne's smug, predatory smile, he knew she was right. His strategy had failed. His money and power had only isolated him. He needed a different kind of weapon. He needed authenticity. He needed her. "All right, Ms. Hayes," he said, a decision solidifying in his mind. "Clara, we have a deal. You're no longer an employee. You're the general manager. You have full operational control. Undo what I've done. Bring it back. Whatever you need, budget, staff, supplies, it's yours. Just tell me what to do." A sense of dizzying possibility washed over Clara. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. It was quickly followed by the crushing weight of reality. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A condition." She explained everything about Leo, the rapid decline, the urgent need for the treatment, the impossible $25,000 deadline. She laid her desperation bare, hating the vulnerability, but seeing no other way. "I can't do this if I'm worried about my brother. I need an advance, a significant one. I'll pay back every single cent, I swear." Julian listened without interruption, his gaze unwavering. The cool, calculating billionaire persona was gone, replaced by something softer, something human. When she finished, a long silence stretched between them. "No," he said finally. Clara's heart plummeted. Of course, it was too much to ask. She had misread him. "No," he repeated, "you will not get an advance, and you will not pay me back." He pulled out his phone and typed for a moment. "Give me the hospital's billing department information and your brother's full name. The full cost of his treatment will be handled, all of it. Consider it a signing bonus for our new partnership." Clara was speechless. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and sudden. I can't accept that." "You can and you will," he said, his tone firm, but not unkind. "This fight with Thorne, it's not just about a building anymore. It's personal. And I don't let my partners go into battle with their hands tied. Take care of your family. I'll take care of this. Then we take back your diner." The transformation of the Bluebird began the next day. It was a reverse renovation, an act of careful restoration. Under Clara's direction, the cold grey leather of the booths was ripped out, and the original warm red vinyl was reinstalled. The minimalist steel salt and pepper shakers were relegated to a box replaced by the quirky, mismatched sets Clara found at a local thrift store. She rehired Sal not as an owner, but as a consultant and head baker, putting him back in charge of his beloved biscuits and pies. She called Mrs. Gable personally to apologize, and tell her that her booth, her decaf, and her favorite waitress were all waiting for her. She went to the construction site and told Manny and Dave that the lumberjack's feast was back on the menu, bigger and better than before. Julian, true to his word, became her silent partner. He traded his corner booth for a small, cramped back office where he spent his days on the phone with lawyers, city planners, and financial analysts, waging a silent war against Marcus Thorne's corporate machine. He was a fish out of water, surrounded by invoices for flour and coffee beans. But he never complained. He'd emerge occasionally looking tired, but determined to ask Clara, "What's next? What do you need?" The old bluebird began to re-emerge like a photograph developing in a dark room. The regulars returned first tentatively, then with a renewed sense of loyalty. The diner was once again filled with the hum of conversation and the clatter of silverware. It was alive. Clara and Julian fell into an easy rhythm. Late at night, after the last customer had left, they would sit at the counter, exhausted but exhilarated, planning their next moves. She'd talk about suppliers and staffing schedules. He'd talk about zoning variances and hostile takeover tactics. In the quiet hours, surrounded by the ghosts of what the diner had been and the promise of what it could become, they began to see each other not as archetypes, but as people. She saw the lonely, grieving man behind the billion-dollar fortune. He saw the fierce, resilient woman who valued community and loyalty above all else. The first real victory came a week later. Julian discovered that one of the properties Thorne claimed to have secured was a small independent bookstore run by an elderly couple. Thorne's company had used predatory tactics, threatening them with legal action to force a sale. Julian's legal team swooped in, voided the contract on a technicality, and provided the couple with pro bono legal protection against any further advances. Thorne's perfect block was no longer perfect. A crack had appeared in his foundation. To celebrate, Julian insisted on having dinner at the diner, not as the owner, but as a customer. Clara cooked for him herself, not a fancy dish from the new menu he'd tried to implement, but a simple perfect cheeseburger and fries. As he ate, he looked happier and more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "You were right," he admitted, looking around at the bustling, happy room. "This is better. This has life. I was trying to preserve a memory, a photograph. But you saved the soul." "We saved it," she corrected him gently. Their biggest test came in the form of a city planning commission meeting. Thorne was petitioning for a zoning change that would allow him to build his massive high-rise, a change that would override the historical preservation status of several buildings on the block, including the diner. It was his checkmate move. The meeting room was cold and formal. Thorne was there flanked by a team of smug lawyers. Julian was there with his own legal counsel, but this time they weren't alone. When Clara walked in, behind her was a crowd of people: Mrs. Gable Manny, Dave Saal, the bookstore owners, and dozens of other local residents and business owners, the community of the Bluebird. Thorne presented his slick, soulless vision of the future, all glass and steel and profit margins. Then it was their turn. Julian's lawyer spoke about legal precedents and zoning laws, but the final speaker was Clara. She stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly, and simply told their story. She spoke of the diner not as a property, but as a landmark of human connection. She spoke of Mrs. Gable finding a reason to leave her house after her husband died. She spoke of students fueling up for exams, of families celebrating small victories of her own fight to save her brother. "Mr. Thorne sees a collection of outdated buildings," she said, her voice ringing with passion. "We see a neighborhood. He sees profit and loss. We see first dates and last goodbyes. You can't put a price on that. This isn't just about preserving a building. It's about preserving our community's heart. And we will not let you rip it out." When she finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then the residents behind her erupted in applause. The commissioners who had been listening with impassive expressions were now looking at Thorne with new critical eyes. Julian caught her eye from across the room and gave her a small, proud smile. In that moment, Clara knew they were going to win. They had done more than just fight back. They had changed the narrative. It was no longer a battle between two wealthy developers. It was a story of a community fighting for its soul. And that was a story no one could ignore. The City Planning Commission's decision landed like a thunderclap in the sterile meeting room. They denied Marcus Thorne's zoning petition. The official reason, read out in a flat monotone by the chairman, cited overwhelming community opposition and the deep cultural significance of the block's establishments. For the residents, it was a declaration of independence. For Marcus Thorne, whose face had gone from smug confidence to a mask of pure fury, it was a humiliating public execution of his ambitions. He and his team of lawyers packed their briefcases in a venomous silence, refusing to meet the triumphant gazes of the community they had tried to bulldoze. Thorne, defeated, pulled his offers and slunk away to find easier prey. The Bluebird was safe. In the aftermath, a new kind of magic infused the diner. The victory had not just been won, it had been earned together. It forged the loose collection of regulars into a true unified force. The story of the defiant waitress and the repentant billionaire became a neighborhood legend, told and retold over coffee and pie. Business didn't just return to normal. It boomed. New faces drawn in by the story of the diner that fought back lined up alongside the old crowd, all wanting a taste of the place that stood for something more than just food. Julian, having won a war he never intended to fight, found himself at a profound crossroads. He had come to Austin for a soulless real estate transaction, and had instead salvaged a piece of his own soul. The process of saving the diner had in turn saved him. He had rediscovered a part of himself he thought had been buried forever with Eleanor. The cold, hard shell he had meticulously constructed over years of grief and relentless ambition had been irrevocably cracked open by the warmth of the Bluebird and the unyielding spirit of its general manager. He found the idea of returning to his sterile New York penthouse, to his life of silent, empty deals, unbearable. One evening, long after the last customer had gone, he found Clara in the cramped back office, a single lamp casting a warm glow on her as she pored over invoices, a small, contented smile on her face. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a moment, the picture of a leader at peace. "You know," he said, his voice soft. "From a purely financial perspective, this remains the most unprofitable, time-consuming, and utterly illogical acquisition of my entire career." Clara looked up, her smile widening. "Having regrets, Mr. Croft?" "Not for a second," he said, and the sincerity in his voice was absolute. He walked into the office, the small space making their proximity feel intimate. He sat in the chair opposite her. "Clara, I'm not selling the diner. But I can't run it from an office in New York either. That life, it doesn't fit anymore. I was thinking, this place needs more than just an owner. It needs a permanent foundation, a guardian, something to ensure it's always protected." He slid a thick leather-bound folder across the desk. Clara opened it, Inside, laid out with the precision of a corporate prospectus, was a proposal to create the Eleanor Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to preserving community landmarks and supporting at-risk small businesses throughout Austin. The foundation's first and primary asset, its heart, would be the Bluebird Diner. It will be run by a board, he explained, his voice filled with a quiet passion she'd never heard before. Sal for his heart and his history. Mrs. Gable for her loyalty and her connection to the soul of this place. The owners of the bookstore as a symbol of our first fight. And you, of course. He paused, his blue eyes locking onto hers. I want you to be the foundation's executive director. You'll oversee the diner, of course, but you'll also identify other places like it, places that need help. You'll have a real budget, a real staff, and the power to make a lasting difference. Clara was stunned into silence, her mind reeling. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. A chance to do what she loved, not just for one diner, but for an entire city. As she numbly turned the page, she saw the final document. It was a copy of a cashier's check, the foundation's first official act of charity. The payee was the pediatric wing of Austin General Hospital. The memo line read, "In honor of Leo Hayes." The amount was enough to fully fund the wing's patient and family support program for the entire next year. Julian, she whispered the name catching in her throat as tears blurred the words on the page. I can't. It's too much. It's not enough, he said quietly, his gaze soft. Eleanor loved people. She believed in lifting them up. For years I forgot that. I just accumulated things, money, companies, buildings. It's all just empty. This, he gestured around the tiny office at the diner beyond the door. This feels real. You didn't just remind me of her, Clara. You reminded me of me. A few weeks later, they held a grand reopening ceremony. It wasn't to celebrate a renovation, but to celebrate a resurrection. The mayor came. Local news crews set up their cameras. The diner was packed to the rafters with a joyous, cheering crowd. Clara stood by the counter, a fixed point in the wonderful chaos, feeling a sense of profound peace settle over her for the first time in years. Across the room, Leo, his cheeks filled out, his breathing easy and unassisted, was laughing in a booth with their ecstatic mother. Sal, beaming with pride, was handing out slices of his famous apple pie. Mrs. Gable was holding court, regaling a reporter with the dramatic tale of Clara's initial defiance. Julian found her in the crowd. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit or a cashmere sweater. He was wearing a simple, clean white apron, over his clothes a silver coffee pot in his hand. "Table 7 needs a refill," he said with a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You know," she teased her heart, doing a little flip for a billionaire philanthropist, "you're not a very good boss. You're supposed to be shaking hands and schmoozing, not serving coffee." "I'm not the boss anymore, remember," he said, stepping closer. "I'm just a silent partner on the board. And right now, I'm a partner who is very thirsty." She laughed, a light, happy sound, and reached for a clean cup, pouring him a stream of dark, fragrant coffee. As she handed it to him, their hands brushed. It was more than a simple touch. A jolt of warmth, surprising and potent, arced between them. In that instant, the carefully drawn professional lines they had maintained blurred and vanished, dissolving into something softer, something intensely personal and unspoken. The war was over, the fight was won, and in the quiet aftermath, they were simply a man and a woman standing together in a place they had both, in their own ways, saved. He looked at her, his once glacial blue eyes now the color of a warm summer sky, filled with a light she'd never seen before. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice low and for her alone. "For what?" she asked softly. "You're the one who wrote the checks." "For reminding me," he said, his gaze holding hers, "that the best things in life can't be bought. They have to be built." He raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. She raised hers in return. The future was unwritten, a blank page waiting for a new story. But as she looked at him, at the thriving, beautiful community they had protected, and thought of her healing brother Clara, knew with absolute and shimmering certainty that it was going to be a beautiful one. From a tense standoff over a breakfast line to an unbreakable alliance, Clara and Julian's story shows us that true value isn't measured in dollars, but in heart community, and the courage to stand for what's right. They started as enemies, a waitress and a billionaire from two different worlds, but they found common ground in the shared language of loss and loyalty. Together they didn't just save a diner, they saved a piece of each other's souls. Their journey reminds us that behind every face there's a story, and sometimes the greatest investments we can make are in each other. If this story of unexpected love, fierce loyalty, and the power of community moved you, please let us know in the comments below. What was your favorite twist? Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into dramas that feel larger than life. Thank you for watching.